Hello and welcome to the Life Writing Show. I'm your host, Chris Jones. Jasmine Hardin joins me for this spotlight conversation to discuss various home ownership and housing related matters throughout the U.S. Hey, Jasmine.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Chris, for having me. I'm excited to be able to feature again. This is round two, and I'm hoping it'll be even better than round one.
A lot has happened,
Mhm.
with various groups of people and what have you, be it disparities. I know we spoke earlier, and that was one of the words that you used. That's kind of that attorney coming out of you, right? Um, I wanted to put some emphasis on certain disparities, events. I don't want to say atrocities or anything like that. I know I used that word previously, but I'll just stick with the disparity. So I guess my first question is like, what American housing related disparity come to your mind when you think about the topic in itself?
Definitely. As a Black woman and a Black American, I, um, and as a history lover in general,
Hmm.
I find myself very familiar with a lot of different mistreatments, we could say.
Right.
Our community has suffered at the hands of our citizenship, honestly. But um, the housing disparity in particular, it sources all the way back to slavery. I mean, once it was abolished, Black families were systemically denied home ownership, excuse me,
Hmm.
um, and there were discriminatory laws, um, practices, and social norms that really bolstered this disparity and made it a generational practice, honestly,
Right.
that we can see today. Even the federal government willingly participated in creating the disparity. The Federal Housing Administration was established in 1934, and it routinely declined to insure mortgages in and around Black neighborhoods.
Right.
Um, and that is a practice that most people know called redlining.
Hmm.
And you know, as I mentioned to you before, with the military, the VA and a lot of the federal government would give military members mortgages at lower rates, and comes with the benefits package to say the least. But
Hmm.
it was often denied again, systemically, routinely, to Black Americans, so even
Absolutely.
especially veterans. And it's just knowing that there's a book I love called How Can We Win by Kimberly Jones.
Uh, I,
Um,
I've heard of that. Yeah, please share that with me
I
later.
will.
Yes.
I will. I've actually done an episode on my channel
Okay.
about. It's a very good book. I still haven't finished it because, funny story, anecdote. I started reading it before I entered law school. Then I started picked it up again, kind of trying to recreational read again in law school. Why was I doing that? I don't know. But um, it was funny because I go to a predominantly white school, and it's a
Okay.
really good book. It's deep with history, deep with facts, deep with things that's like, wow, I didn't even know this. But
Okay.
or I heard of it, but I didn't know this to this extent. And I would be sitting there in rooms full of white people reading the book and getting angry. And I was like, you know what? Close the book. Okay, we
Wow.
gotta have to. We're gonna have to like come back to this when
Wow.
we're in a different place mentally. Mentally,
Yeah.
because y'all, it's not about to be vexing my spirit while I'm in these spaces. Because yes, I appreciate the information, but sometimes it can be frustrating to hear it and
Yeah.
be faced with the facts, because we are all
Yeah.
so often denied those
Hmm.
facts, as we know they're still trying to do that in Congress today.
Right.
But
Right.
um yeah, so knowing that it's like, okay, well, these people were going to war, coming back, and they were like, yeah, you can't even get a house, my man.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just and there's so much more. There's so much more. That's just like scratching the surface,
So
but
much more. And to your point, though, I mean, it what's so sad about everything you just laid out. I mean, from the initiation of the Federal Housing Administration to the VA loans denying the military, black specifically. Um, to think how long those practices were going on. You know, that activity crossed several, multiple decades. I know families who have acres and acres and acres of land. Forget the house in and of itself, right? But the house came with several acres of land, and just to think in today's age, today's times, what that's worth, right? So talk about generational wealth, and I know we're going to touch on some aspects later, but that's always where my mind goes. And you know, again, we're talking about wealth building, wealth creation from housing or home ownership specifically, but
Mhm.
I look at it holistically, with respect to everything else that came along with it. So I'm glad you raised that point. So
Definitely.
where I was going next, or where I wanted to go next, and we kind of just touched on it, you initially. Um,
Mhm.
it's kind of like the question is like, how do you think that shaped the home ownership landscape today? I kind of just touched on that as well, but do you care to expound on that just a little from your vantage point?
Definitely. I'm actually currently doing a legal internship with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law.
Oh,
And we do a
cool.
lot of work with, of course, we just said civil. I mean, it's in the name, civil rights, but the Fair Housing Act. We do a lot of work with that. So
Okay.
it's definitely been interesting getting up to speed on what those cases today are looking like, and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Very interesting. So I can't really go into all that, of course, but
Yeah.
I
Yep.
can't really talk about too much of that.
Oh,
But what
come
I
on,
can,
now. Come on, give us some. Give us some. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
right,
I know.
insider now, now, now. But the the point I was going to get at is that I'll just again turn back the hands of time a little bit to even give you a context for those who don't know what the Fair Housing Act even is or why it's a thing that causes civil rights litigation today.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Thank you. Yeah.
any of that. So, as I mentioned, after slavery and all these things, historical practices, like you said, the Fair Housing Administration was in 1934. That's a long time ago. 1934. Um, this ninth, sorry, getting tongue tied. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 didn't
Mm-hmm.
happen until 30 years later. So let's start there.
Right.
So that's, yeah, like you said, decades of this practice, of these practices. So then you add the context that the Fair Housing Act wasn't until 1968. So so it takes time. It took time to even get to the point where people can then start going to court and fighting for their rights
Right.
that were so long denied. So with that, as you can imagine, comes all types of customs practices, whatever. Even things that were built into the law of this country, what they call common law of
Mm-hmm.
this country. You know, for example, restrictive covenants I've mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
that there are in property law, there are basically ways that the government can, or private citizens, homeowners can go to the government and ask them to determine or to establish, give an order about how a certain land can or cannot be used. Now, there's an easement, which means, or prescription, which means you can, prescriptive easement, whatever. You can
Mm-hmm.
get permission to use the land, but they can only use said land in a certain way. So it's basically a way to restrict or impose the right of use of land.
Yes.
So, which every property owner has to some degree or another. But the covenants
Mm-hmm.
on the opposite, the easement gives you permission to use the land, but in a particular way, and then the covenants take the rights away. So it's saying, yeah, you may be able to use this land, but only in this type of way. And I know that sounds very similar, but one
Yep.
is giving you permission. So,
Hmm.
for example, a beach, say it's a beach town, you may get a easement. I mean, this is back in the day. Now, depending on the state and all this other stuff,
Right.
so bear with me, y'all. Bear with me, but yeah, because it can get confusing if you start trying to add too much in there.
Yes.
But and I
Yeah.
miss
I like the information, the education in itself. So thanks.
definitely, definitely. So depending on where you are, the state you're in, all these things, you know, we'll just use the beach for example. This is where a lot of the easement conversation I know originated from, or at least I learned a lot of cases about it in class. But
Uh-huh.
a beach is like something where it's like, okay, people, you may have a house on the beach, but you can't, depending on where you're at and things like that, you may not be able to be like, well, you can use the beach, but you can't use the beach that the part of the beach that's right in front of my house, you
Right.
know. And then they would get an easement to say, okay, or the community, or for public interest reasons, they could get an easement and say, well, actually, they can use the beach part. They can use all the way up to the sand, 10 feet to your property. You know what I mean? They'll say
Wow.
something like that, where
Okay.
it's like, okay, well, this is a public place, so you can't necessarily say they can't use it. But it all depends. Like I said, this all depends because as we know, um, there's all types of private beaches and this and that. So, like I said,
Yeah.
this all relative. But that's just to give you a breakdown of the concept of an easement or prescription, where it's like, okay, well,
No,
we give you
that,
permission to use
that's
it, but
interesting.
yeah, but you can't do the like you can only use the 5 feet of space on the beach if you want to. You can only use it in a way that a beach
Uh-huh.
person can actually use it, and you can't just
Right.
like build a house or you know things
Exactly.
things like that.
So, what can people do to help combat some of the discriminatory practices? I know things have gotten cleaned up a lot to date, but we still see cases. We
Yep.
still see cases, right? Hear cases, read cases about certain lenders, major lenders, with some type of discriminatory practices or what have you, right? So, like, what comes to your mind from that perspective? Like, what can people do to combat it?
Definitely. So I know I kind of went off on a tangent, but the
No, I love the tangent because it was good information.
yeah, no, anytime. I know I'm good for a good tangent, so I love to be steered back on course. But the Fair Housing Act, like I said, it was created because a lot of discriminatory practices, such as the covenants, restrictive covenants that were used to basically say, oh, this neighborhood is a white only neighborhood. And if you try and sell it to a black people can't live in here. People, any race, I just use black people, but
Right.
sexuality, race, religion, it was all,
Hmm.
Jewish people, Asian people, Hispanic, it was not just black people that this was used against or weaponized against.
Hmm.
But um but that's where the Fair Housing Act came to be after a case like Shelley versus Kramer. I highly recommend anyone who's interested in this type of stuff to look into it. It's a Supreme Court case that basically established that in 1948 that hey, you can't use covenants. You can't use race in a covenant to say that people can't
Oh
use property.
yeah, I remember that case. Yeah, I was reading about that in college somewhere. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
so yeah, it played a huge. This is prior to the Fair Housing Act. So this is
Yeah.
1948. The Fair Housing Act wasn't until 1968. So again,
1968.
20 years after this
Okay.
case, and I can't emphasize that enough because justice takes time.
Right.
It takes time, and
Right.
it's slow, but it took a long time to even get to where we are today. But anywho, the Fair Housing Act comes in and it basically says, hey, you can't use race, religion, sexuality, whatever, gender. You can't use that as a reason to discriminate in housing.
Uh huh.
So a lot of cases it's a legal resource, and I emphasize it because it is a resource. That's what it's created to be.
Exactly. Hmm.
To be used for people to have a footing legally to take people to court and say, hey, I'm being discriminated against because of XYZ reasons that are protected, what they call a protected class under the 1964 um, Civil Rights Act.
Hmm.
So, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, there's a lot of things that stem from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Of course, we're focusing on housing today, but Yeah, so a lot of these things were created as a more streamlined way of approaching issues that the Civil Rights Act itself couldn't didn't or could not address at the time.
Got it.
Yeah, that's a big way. And I also want to put the bug in the ear.
Mm-hmm.
If you are, that's the excuse me, that's a resource if you are being discriminated discriminated against.
Uh-huh.
But to prevent, preventative measures at
Uh-huh.
least, for protecting yourself or having some footing to make sure that you're looking out for yourself in a, in a strategic way,
Mm-hmm.
is getting a estate plan. And I am big on trusting estates. That's one of my career pursuits, I'll say, that I'm
Oh.
interested. So getting an estate plan is a big, and it sounds like an estate plan. Like I got one property, I got two cars. I may not. This ain't me, but I'm just saying this may sound people
One day soon.
one day soon. It's coming. My time will come. But when it's like, oh, I don't even have that. Why do I need an estate plan? Estate, the word just sounds foreign. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
why would I need all that? But
Uh-huh.
in reality, like, that's how you build generational wealth. Like, you talk about building wealth with property and housing, like, you do it by protecting those assets. Because when with property law, one thing I cannot emphasize enough that I have learned is that
Uh-huh.
if you do not have your affairs in order, probate court does not care.
Yeah.
Probate court does not care at all. They
I've heard
will
some horror
just,
stories.
yeah, they will do whatever is they. You know how many cases they're getting on a daily? They will brush that case off like any other
Yeah.
situation, because there's just such an overload of it going on. So, and
Right.
it's unfortunate when there isn't clarity. A lot of people think, oh, well, a will. No, a will is not an estate plan. It's a starting point for sure. Definitely need one. Okay.
Right.
Especially if you have children, especially if you have assets, like really bad, please get one.
I'm glad we're having this conversation as you um, brought this to my attention fairly recently, especially on the heels of Juneteenth. Getting this type of information to the masses, but particularly to those who have been hurt in some form or fashion about it, or potentially hurt by this or the lack thereof, having certain bits of the knowledge, even a facet of some of the things that you shared during this
Definitely.
segment. This can definitely be a series because there's so much information to
Yeah.
unpack, and we're talking about when we're talking about housing in itself, one of the biggest assets, one of the biggest spends that most of us are going to make in our lifetime, right?
Yeah.
So you need to be as informed as possible when it comes to any realm of home ownership. So
Definitely.
this has been this has been great, Jackson. This has been
Yeah.
great.
I appreciate you for having me, and I'm glad to be able to bounce things off of people. It's a joy of mine, as you can if you can't tell. If you can't tell, I can get a little passionate, but it's just because I love knowledge. I love sharing knowledge. I love the exchange of the aha moment. I love to
Yeah,
have an aha moment, and I love to give it. So, I mean, yeah,
I love it.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. And yeah, I've already put you on the spot 2 or 3 times, so I'm not gonna do it again. No need to. Like, okay, Chris, I got it. I'll be back,
Yeah.
and you owe me too, dog. Come on over to the platform. Yeah,
Yes, 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 definitely, definitely.
and in fact, I want to make sure I put that back up there. Uh, Jazz, the host of the platform, Let's Talk About It podcast. Are you on YouTube now? Right?
I am, and I will send you that link. I'll make sure that it's you're able to
Okay.
attach it so people can can
Yep.
subscribe. Go ahead and head over, and I
Good.
will. I plan on getting some video content out soon.
Okay. Okay.
She's developing. She's developing. But yeah, I finally got her set up at least. So I'll be
Good.
loving. I do have episodes, as you know. You can link my my show. My it's
Hmm.
on. Podcasts and Spotify and
Yep.
all those things. So you can link that as well. And people can look at the episodes I have already published and look out for the ones, subscribe and follow, and you'll be getting notifications for the new ones coming out.
There it is. Well, Jasmine, thanks again for joining me for this spotlight conversation. And to the audience, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Life Writing Show. Subscribe to the channel, like the videos that resonate with you, comment and share. The show is another way we creatively inform and inspire people to write the lives they desire. Take care.